of the Joint Committee of
Honorable
the...
Gikaria, start by saying I beg to move the following motion.
Honorable Speaker, I would like to move the following motion of consideration of nominee for appointment as members of the National Climate Change Council. That taking into consideration the finding of the Joint Committee of the National Assembly Departmental Committee on Environment, Forestry and Mining, and the Senate Standing Committee on Lands, Environment and Natural Resources, it is this report on the vetting of the nominee for appointment as members of the National Climate Change Council laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, 14th March 2023, and pursuant to Article 132, 2F of the Constitution, Section 7(4) of the Climate Change Act, Section 3 and 8 of the Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act 2011, and Standing Order 216(5)F of the National Assembly, and the Standing Order number 2284F, A, approves the appointment of the following persons as members of the National Climate Change Council. 1, Emily Mwende Waita. 2, John Kioli Kalua. 3, Professor George Odera Outa. And B, rejects the appointments of Umra Omar as a member of the Climate Change Council. Honorable Speaker, on Tuesday the 14th, as indicated, 2023, you issued a communication from His Excellency the President regarding the nominee as I have read. Mr. Speaker, sir, pursuant to Standing Order 45(1) and the fourth schedule of the Standing Order, the names and CVs, curricula vitae, of the 4 nominees were referred to the Departmental Committee on Environment, Forestry and Mining, jointly sitting with the Senate Standing Committee on Lands, Environment and Natural Resources. Mr. Speaker, on Friday the 17th February 2023, pursuant to Section 8 of the Public Appointments Parliamentary Committee Approval Act number 33 of 2011, the Clerk of the National Assembly did, and the Clerk of the Senate, in writing, invited nominees for vetting hearing, indicating the time and place for holding the approval hearing. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to the provisions of Section 6(9) of the Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act 2011, the Clerk of the National Assembly and the Clerk of the Senate, in writing, of the Senate, and placed an advertisement in the print media on Monday, 20th February 2023, inviting the public to submit memoranda by way of written statement on oath or a stroke affidavit contesting the suitability of the nominees. The advertisement indicated that the submissions were received on Monday, 27th February 2023 at 5 p.m. Mr. Speaker, by close of that day, the committee had not received any written statement on oath contesting the suitability of any of the nominees. The Clerk of the National Assembly and the Clerk of the Senate wrote to the respective agencies, the EACC, KRA, DCI, HELB, and the Registrar of Political Party, requesting for reports with respect to the nominee on matter touching to integrity, tax compliance, political affiliation, and loan repayments. Mr. Speaker, sir, we received clearance report for the nominee from the Kenya from Kenya Revenue Authority, the DCI, EACC, HELB, and of course, Honorable Speaker, the Register of Political Parties. Mr. Speaker, sir, the National Assembly Departmental Committee on Environment, Forestry and Mining, jointly sitting with the Senate Standing Committee on Lands, Environment and Natural Resource, conducted approval hearing on Tuesday, 7th March 2023. The nominees were vetted in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution, the Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act 2011, and the National Assembly Standing Orders on their suitability or otherwise for appointment as members of the National Climate Change Council. Pursuant to Section 7 of the Public Appointments Committee Approval Act 2011 and Section 7(1) of the Climate Change Act number 11 of 2016, the committee considered various issues during the approval hearing. First, the Joint Committee considered the procedure used to arrive at the nominee. The Joint Committee observed that pursuant to Section 7(2) F, G, H, and I of the Climate Change Act 2016, the President is required to nominate a person for appointment to the National Climate Change Council if that person has expertise and experience in matters of climate change, economic, finance, law, enforcement, and public administration. As a citizen, is a citizen of Kenya, fulfills the requirement of Chapter 6 of the Constitution, and has at least 10 years' experience in the relevant field. Additionally, Honorable Speaker, the Joint Committee observed that the 4 persons nominated must be representatives of a private sector, nominated by a body representing the largest number of institutions in the private sector. B, the civil society, nominated by the most representative registered National Umbrella Association of Civil Societies working on climate change. C, marginalized community within the meaning of Article 260 of the Constitution who has knowledge and experience in matters relating to indigenous knowledge. And lastly, D, the academia nominated by the Commission of University Education. Mr. Speaker, the Joint Committee, in determining the suitability of the nominee, took into consideration the provisions of leadership and integrity as outlined under Chapter 6 of the Constitution. Further, the committee observed that the suitability of the nominee should be evaluated holistically, taking into account their academic credentials, professional training, experience, background, and personal qualities, as well as the performance of the nominee during the approval hearing, which is very key, Honorable Speaker. The National Assembly Department Committee on Environment, Forestry and Mining, jointly with the Sitting Committee on Senate, Lands, Environment and Natural Resource, having vetted the nominee, made the following general observation: that in accordance with Article 78(1) of the Constitution and Section 7(2) of the Climate Change Act 2016, requirement of Chapter 6 of the Constitution on leadership and integrity. 4, that the nominee have never been convicted in a court of law for criminal offenses in the past 3 years. 5, as stipulated in Article 75(1) of the Constitution, the nominee have no potential conflict of interest. 6, that the nominee do not hold offices in any political party, hence satisfy a requirement of Article 77(2) of the Constitution, in exception, Honorable Speaker, of one nominee, Umra Omar, who, as at the time was a member of the Safina party, and he had the production of the indicating that he was a member of that. 7, the nominee has never been dismissed from office under Article 75 of the Constitution for contravening Article 75(1), conflict of interest, 76, financial probity, 77, restriction of state officers, 78(2), dual citizenship of the Constitution, and lastly, Honorable Speaker, that the nominee were nominated in accordance with Section 7(2), F, G, H, and I of the Climate Change Act number 11 of 2016. Mr. Speaker, sir, the 3 nominees, Amy Mwende Waita, John Kioli Kalua, and Professor George Odera Outa, demonstrated knowledge on topical issues, technical and administrative issues touching on climate change, and have the requisite abilities, qualifications, and experience to serve as members of the National Climate Change Council. However, Mr. Speaker, sir, Umra Omar did not demonstrate knowledge on tropical issues, technical and administrative issues, touching on the indigenous knowledge contrary to Section 7(2)H of the Climate Change Act 2016. Consequently, the nominee lacks the requisite abilities and experience to serve as representative of the marginalized community of the National Climate Change Council. Lastly, Honorable Speaker, is that I urge members to read comprehensively the Joint Committee report of the National Assembly Parliamentary Committee on Environment, Forestry and Mining, and the Senate Standing Committee on Lands, Environment and Natural Resources in order to fully appreciate and enrich the debate. I further urge members to adopt the recommendations and of the committee as contained in the report. Honorable Speaker, just to highlight is that it is a joint committee between us and the Senate. The Senate will be discussing the same in the plenary on this matter, Honorable Speaker. And it is true that when the 4 nominees did appear before us, each was given an ample time, 2 hours. We were there from 8 all the way to around 7, actually 8 in the night. And Honorable Speaker, as indicated to that fact, is that all the 3 nominees, that is Amy Mwende Waita, Mr. John Kioli, and Professor George Odera, did demonstrate knowledge of the climate change. And Honorable Speaker, climate change is seen as if it is not being, it is actually the world, currently, it is trending all over the world. And you can imagine, Honorable Speaker, that climate change, if it's not handled properly, the situation that this country is, the situation that the whole world is currently, is the situation that will, and it is going to get worse, Honorable Speaker, if we are not able to address and get members in the Climate Change Council who understands and can be able to bring some meaningful change. And the 3 actually did tell us that actually climate change occurrences are man-made. It is the human that affects the environment. It is us who are destroying our environment to a point that these days you cannot be able to predict anything about the climate. And they told us that if it is not addressed properly, Honorable Speaker, particularly the emissions by the industrialized countries and the big countries that we always talk about, then we will end up suffering, Honorable Speaker. And one of the issues that this country has excelled again very well, it is on matter of carbon credit. Honorable Speaker, we have planted so much trees. And that tree, it is the recipient of the emissions, as they also give out oxygen, Honorable Speaker. And being a recipient of the emissions by the industrialized world, then we are supposed, as a country, to be actually in Africa, we are the biggest earners, or second biggest, after Congo, because of the trees and the vegetation that we have. But the government does not benefit at all, because we have two options where we have the government can be able to be the biggest earners of the carbon credit, but at the moment, Honorable Speaker, we don't earn anything because that has been taken by individuals. And of course it is acceptable. Individuals could be able to encourage communities to be able to plant more trees so that they can be able to be earners of that carbon credit. But also the government needs to play a bigger role in earning the whatever is received from the carbon credit, so that it can be able to reinvest the same amounts into checking the climate and of course handling some of the environmental issues that are happening in this country. Honorable Speaker, the forests, and we were pleased because some of these nominees, when we did put across some of the questions, like, for example, we did put a question about the 15 billion trees, and he said, yes, Professor Odera said very well. But at the same time, he did advise that please, as Parliament, be informed by science. Let us not just be making decisions here based on our hearts and our heads. We should allow science also to guide us in our decision making. And one of the issues that he did speak to, which was saying it's a good idea to have 15 billion trees, but do you know by planting 15 billion trees, then it means you have already covered half of your country. Again now, where will you be taking your people? That is a question that we need to ask. Secondly, he said, assuming at any one time we have attained our 15 billion trees coverage that we ambitiously want to achieve, all of a sudden, and as we are talking now, Honorable Speaker, almost half of our forest has been destroyed because of the forest fires. And these forest fires are not, they are started by the same human beings. Again, we will become the biggest emitters of the same thing that we are trying to avoid. Again, he was telling us we must, as we plant the 15 billion trees, we must put enough measures to be able to address, in case of forest fires, what is going to happen and what are you going to, so that we can be. Honorable Speaker, the President is the chair of the Climate Change Council. His deputy is his deputy chair. So you can imagine how that important is. And that is why one of the nominees did not prove to us that they could be able to go along in that direction. With those, Honorable Speaker, I beg, Honorable Speaker, with those few remarks, I beg to move and call upon Honorable my Vice Chair, Charles Cameron, to second.
Charles Cameron, Honorable Charles Cameron, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand to